Hey everybody, BigBlackHatMan here, and today I'm going to continue my look at the AFI's top 10 list. And today on the list we have a very special entry with John Wayne. John Wayne! Yeah, John Wayne, that's right, John Wayne. And I really like John Wayne. John Wayne, in my mind, is essential to liking Westerns. He is probably the most quintessential Western star who ever lived. It's hard to like Westerns without liking John Wayne. Claiming to like Westerns and claiming not to like John Wayne is like claiming to be a Christian while claiming not to like the Jesus guy. Yeah, thanks for that blasphemous example. At any rate, today is number 9 on the list with Stagecoach on AFI versus BigBlackHatMan.
In our streamlined world today, adventure takes wings. Planes shuttle across country at amazing speed. Man has raced around the earth in less than 4 days. Planes roar at 400 miles an hour. Airships, streamlined trains and buses speed thousands to new frontiers. Yet well within the span of our memory, the streamliner of its day, the American stagecoach, crossed the uncharted rugged West, bringing new people to a new country. What fascinating stories there were in the life of the stagecoach, and in the lives of its courageous passengers who found romance in danger and understanding in strange companionships. From the adventures of these American frontier characters, John Ford has created a truly great motion picture, Stagecoach, a drama as forceful and as true as The Informer, and as gripping as The Hurricane.
Did you all hear what the lieutenant said?
What are you trying to do, scare somebody?
If you'll take my advice, ma'am, you won't take this trip.
My husband is with his troops in Dry Fork. If he's in danger, I want to be with him.
All right, folks.
Hey, Curly, why don't you take the cuffs off the kid? He's mighty handy with a gun.
You drive them horses. I'll take care of the kid.
The man works all his life to get a hold of some money so that he can enjoy life, and has to run into a trap like this.
Trap, brother? You mean the Apaches? There's been no sign of them.
You don't see any signs of them. They strike like rattlesnakes.
You talk too much, Gatewood.
Don't threats, don't please.
Take it easy, Gatewood. We may need that fighting before we get...
Stagecoach, a film by famous director John Ford, came out in 1939, and like many John Ford films, is pretty straightforward. And the plot is exactly what it sounds like. It's about a group on a stagecoach heading west. They just happen to have some adventures along the way and be a very disparate group of people. There's a couple women. One's a prostitute being driven out by a league of upstanding moral women, and there's another woman who's a pregnant wife of a cavalry sergeant, and there's a banker who's stolen some money. He's embezzled it from his bank, and he's a criminal. There's a southern gentleman who's kind of a jerk, and let's see, who else is there? There's the Ringo Kid. That's John Wayne, for those who don't know, and he gets on later. There's also a marshal who has to arrest him, and there's a stage driver who's Ringo Kid's friend, and let's see here. Is there anybody else on the stage? Oh yeah, they don't matter. Yeah, I think that's it. Wait, is that it? Yeah, that's it. No, there's a doctor. He's drunk. There's a whiskey salesman with the drunk. Oh, man. That's a bad combination. It doesn't really matter. At any rate, they keep going west, and they keep getting in more and more trouble. Eventually, they're attacked by Native Americans. Apaches. Geronimo. Yeah. And there's a big attack, and that's the big climax of the film. But actually, there's a climax that takes place after it because the Ringo Kid has a score to settle. But he actually escaped from prison, and they put him back in jail, and I guess that part's kind of complicated. I thought this plot was more simple than this. No, it's still pretty simple. And then he actually falls in love with the prostitute, too. The Ringo Kid, that is, played by John Wayne, yeah. And, overall, you just have to kind of see the movie. I mean, it's really scenic, and it's really nice, and Andy Devine's funny as the driver, and the marshal's got some good moments, and John Wayne plays really heroic in this film, and, yeah, there's a lot to see in it. It's more one you got to see than really can be summarized, because, like I said, the plot is actually pretty straightforward with this one, and somewhat predictably, but you get the point. So the reason Stagecoach is considered a classic, well, there's actually quite a few of them. I mean, let's start with this one. This came at the peak of John Ford's career. He won 2 Best Director awards in consecutive years in this era. John Ford on a roll. That is impressive, because John Ford was a pretty good director. Yeah, he was a really good director, and this is kind of the height of his career. This is at his very zenith when he did films like Grapes of Wrath, How Green Was My Valley, Young Mr. Lincoln, all considered classics and all done in about a 2 to 3 year period, and Stagecoach is one of those films, so that's why it gets classic status. Also, This is the film that was John Wayne's big breakthrough role. He'd had one other big A role in 1930 in The Big Trail, but the film didn't do very well. It kind of flopped despite having sort of a cult classic status now. And he did a lot of B films for the 30s. He wasn't really a big star. This was the film that took him from small-time B-screen star, which he could have stayed much like Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, other B-stars of the era, and made him a big, top-line A star. It made John Wayne what we think of him as today. Making John Wayne. Now there's a reason to celebrate. Yeah, stop celebrating. That's atrociously bad. Yeah, John Wayne's career. Yeah, it was vaulted by this film. Well, there's one other small thing that makes this film a classic. It saved the Western genre. Wait, what? How did it save the Western genre? This is when B-Westerns were at their height. This is right before the World War II period when huge, huge Westerns came out. How is it that this movie, this one individual small movie, Stagecoach, saved the Western? I'm glad I asked that question because it's an important one. You see, in 1939, when Stagecoach came out, the Western was sort of in a decline. B-Westerns had really dominated the whole Western genre for about a decade. Big-name, big-budget Westerns weren't the order of the day in the 30s because, well, it was a lot cheaper to make a small Western with a notable star like John Wayne himself and make what money you could off of it. The problem was that B-Westerns were sort of on their way out. Rising production costs and the end of the serial were sort of knocking those out of play. So, for Westerns to survive, they had to become big-budget films. And they hadn't really been big-budget films since about the mid-20s, from before the talking era at this point. Since talking had come into films, Westerns really hadn't done that well. I talked about The Big Trail earlier, which was a huge failure in 1930. That is to say, it just didn't make very much money. And so John Ford, who had made one of the biggest Westerns of all time, The Iron Horse in 1924, decided that he was going to revive the Western. Well, maybe he didn't decide that specifically, but he ended up doing it with this film. It showed that you could put stars like Claire Trevor, who was in this film, who was actually top billed above John Wayne. People didn't really know who John Wayne was at the time, except for, B fans. So it really formed a new audience for the Western, one that could appreciate a more artsy Western, a more plot-driven Western, a better made, better acted Western. You also have John Kerry in this film in one of his best roles. It's just a good film. It's a solid film. It's a film that made the Western viable again on a big budget stance when that seemed to be the only way they were going to make it because the B was going away. And in fact, the B would by the mid-40s pretty much be gone. But this also launched the period of really good Westerns made in the post-World War II era. So Stagecoach is a huge pivotal moment in the Western genre. It goes from, small films to big films, and this is the reason why. So, yeah, it's easy to see why this is a classic. Well, my own personal opinion on Stagecoach is actually pretty easy. It's a really, really good film. John Wayne! Yes, John Wayne. John Wayne. I'm a big fan of John Wayne. Of course, this is a John Wayne film. John Ford! Thank you. And yes, I'm a John Ford fan. He's one of my favorite all-time directors, so having John Wayne and John Ford makes it pretty easy that I'm going to enjoy this film. It's honestly not one I'd probably miss on. How could I not love it? It's Stagecoach! John Wayne! John Ford! Yeah. Well, it's sort of a patent-made movie, right? I mean, John Wayne, John Ford, like I said before, and a pretty good story. I mean, this disparate group on his Stagecoach, lots of conflicts between the group. Nobody in the group is perfect. They all have little dynamics running between each other. The drunken doctor and the whiskey salesman are pretty much the comic relief of the group. You have the Southern gentleman who's with the lady who's pregnant trying to defend her honor, all the while trying to be honorable himself, but kind of being a scum secretly. The banker who's a cheat and a liar and a thief, despite seeming respectable. That's kind of what Ford was taking on here as classes and our thoughts on class in a lot of ways. It's a really smartly done film in that sense, with lots of characters having lots of dynamic places in it. It's kind of a good film for any cinephile to watch. Honestly, in that sense, it's got a really interesting dynamic. And the action scenes are great. Mention Yakima Nut. Right, okay, Yakima Nut. Probably not as familiar a name as John Wayne or John Ford, but he's actually very important to the Western genre. He was a great stunt coordinator. He was John Wayne's best friend and was his stunt double through much of the 30s. And would go on to be a great second unit director for a lot of Western films. He, actually, in last week's film, Cat Ballou, the good action in that movie is because of Yakima Nut. He was a huge force and influenced tons of trick riding, fighting, gunplay, all that sort of stuff throughout this golden era of Westerns by being just an excellent stuntman and second unit director. And so, yeah, this is the first time we really see Yakima Nut shine. And he's got a really hard name to pronounce, Yakima Nut. But it's also kind of catchy too, right? I mean, Yakima Nut. It's not his real first name. It's where he's from. He's from Yakima, so it makes sense. Anyway, the film's good. So does this film deserve its spot on the AFI's top 10 westerns list? The honest answer is no. Wait, what? What'd you say? I could have swore. See, I was kind of snoozing because I figured this part was really obvious, but I could have swore you said no. Yeah, I did say no, and it's kind of hard for me to believe in a way too, because this is a really good film, but we're talking about an elite list here. We're talking about the top 10 westerns of all time. And though Stagecoach is really good, it's also got its flaws, so I'm going to go into those in just a second, but yeah, I said no. I can't believe what I'm... No? No? How is it no? Well, this is a pretty elite list. Like I said, only 10 spots. And this film has some flaws, and some of them are kind of big. I mean, number one, the idea that this group would even get together, this disparate group, is kind of silly if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. It's also got a double climax. It's really distracting. The first climax is pretty good. It's the one everybody thinks about, the Apaches chasing down the stagecoach out on the open plains, which, by the way, William S. Hart, one of my heroes, he was critical of it because he pointed out the Apaches would have just shot the horses and then picked off the group rather than waiting for the cavalry to show up like they do in the movie. Oops, spoilers. If you haven't seen the film from 1939, I guess you're not gonna, but don't worry about it. At any rate, though, there's actually a climax after that climax. There's one that's much less exciting. It's the Ringo Kid, played by John Wayne, versus his antagonist from the film they keep talking about, and it's just your run-of-the-mill, everyday, average gun duel. And I can bet most people already know how it ends, given, you know, it's John Wayne. This sounds pretty nitpicky. Are you sure it doesn't belong in the top 10 westerns of all time? Well, yeah, and one of my biggest arguments is who made the film, John Ford and John Wayne. You see, they did better movies. In all honesty, they did movies like Fort Apache, which has a more interesting antagonist and a more interesting story and a better climax because, well, it ends when the movie climaxes. They did She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, another cavalry picture that's really, really good. There's also The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which is a really interesting noir film, probably the most noir western Ford ever did. He occasionally did dip into that genre, and that film has more interesting dynamic between the characters. And so I would say all those films are better built, actually better acted, because, let me be honest about something else. Wayne was still coming to his own as an actor in 1939, and so his performance is kind of shabby, and you can tell Ford didn't completely trust him, as there's times when he just delivers a line and then stares at somebody, and he's told to do that, and you can tell he was told to do that, and so it ends up with being like, da-da-da-da-da. And that's kind of all he does. He became a better actor post-World War II. We'll get into that more later, because there's, well, movies on the list that come from post-World War II that have John Wayne in them. But at this point, he's still a pretty shaky actor, and like I said last time, there's plenty of actors who got left off this list. Jimmy Stewart, Henry Fonda, the Magnificent Seven. With all those things off this list, it's hard for me to put this movie on this list, especially when I think John Wayne and John Ford did better movies. But the historical significance! I'm not arguing against historical significance. If we were arguing historical significance, Stagecoach would be number one with a bullet. But here's the thing, the AFI didn't set up a criteria. They didn't say historical significance counted in the making of this list. In fact, they just seem to be saying standalone films. There's a lot of movies on this list that aren't really significant to the genre in any way, shape, or form. And I'm going to argue that on quite a few of them. In fact, I would argue that on almost all of the top 5. Well, there's one that's an exception, but I'll get into that later. The point is that historical significance doesn't seem to play a role in a lot of the movies on the list. So, how come it counts here? It can't. It can't count that way. It's got to be one or the other. And if you're counting historical significance, then the list is so much more flawed, I'd have to spend tons more time on it. So that's the problem with the movie. It's a good movie. It's a solid movie. It's a fun movie to watch. I would recommend almost anybody see it. But it's not great, and it's got huge, huge flaws in it that anybody's going to notice the first time they see it. I can't believe this, arguing against Stagecoach. Stagecoach? What is wrong with you? I don't even know you anymore. I'm leaving. Wait, you're me. You can't leave. I'm still here. Wait, but it's me in a cut, so it's actually fine. Don't worry about it. The final word on this film is this. Stagecoach is a really good film. I would recommend almost any cinephile seeing the film because it's well made, it's well directed, it's well shot. it's okay acted. It's not great acted. That's where the flaws start to come in. And quite frankly, the script isn't all that great. And the second climax is not that great. And so it's not perfect. And we're talking about an elite list of 10. And if we're judging as a film alone, like I said, it has a hard time standing up. Significant, yes. Historically significant, incredibly so. But I'm not sure we're judging on that basis. If they had said they were judging on that basis, I would get it. In fact, I would argue it should be higher. But the way it is, this is how I see it. Well, I hope you appreciate that opinion, since, well, it might rub some people the wrong way, given how laudatory I am in the film. It's just that that's how I see it. So, happy trails, and looking forward to number 8, and watch out for those rough patches. Yeah, stop celebrating. That's kind of atrociously scary. There is one other thing other than making John Wayne Stark and at the peak of John Ford's career that does make Stagecoach... Stagecoach, it's hard to say. Stagecoach is hard to say over and over again. Just try it like a tongue twister. Stagecoach, Stagecoach, Stagecoach. I talk good.